So the recording has started. So today we're going to promote and kick off with the DEI learning trajectory. And in the past months, we've been working hard together with an active group of members of Partos, but also other organizations active in international development that want to dedicate more time and effort to actually implement and integrate diversity, equity, and inclusion within their program. And for Partos, this is actually a very interesting question, because what should be the role of Partos when we're talking as a branch organization in international development with over 100 members? What is it actually that we can do? And we often have a catalyzing role in bringing partners together and exchanging, but in this specific case of diversity, equity, and inclusion, we're also talking about something more foundational to international development, which is basically how we come to terms with also our relationship, our historical relationship with, for example, colonialism, but also racial justice within international development. And we've seen various social movements asking for more awareness for social justice issues, such as Black Lives Matter, the Me Too movement, but also Charity So White. And this actually points it at a very crucial direction that we should also do something. And many organizations, including probably yours, that have been joining this session today, are working on the question, what do we do with DEI? And for us, this is basically a learning space. But this quote, which I mentioned earlier, is probably what really drives me personally, but I think also us as Partos, that we really want to build organizations and support organizations to live its values of anti-oppression and intersectionality and justice as much internally as it seeks to do its work with its partners. And oh, I thought I left that animation out, but Partos is doing some of its work as well. We're working on decolonization of development, and we've been working actively on inclusive communication and ethical communication. And there are many efforts about shifting power. And when we're talking about DEI, it's also important to think about the that it's actually lining up in previous efforts that are focusing on shifting towards more transformative and inclusive practices within international development. So there's really a background that we have to take along. And I think in creating this process, we've seen that this background really came to the front from all the organizations that have been active in this process. So about the program of today, we're going to present the learning trajectory about the course that we've been developing, but we're not going to do that alone. First of all, we've invited Mignon Tholen to give us a lightning talk, a presentation about DEI and how it's actually relating to the content of international development. And we will invite the different community of practice members that have been co-creating this DEI learning trajectory with us to actually present the 6 different modules that have been rolled out. There will be room for questions, but I will ask you to keep them for the Q&A moments. And I also invite you to enter and follow this session by actually first listening deeply and then internalizing what that actually means for your organization, and then opening up again and start sharing with whatever comes to your mind, if that's a question, if that's a remark or a comment. We're really in the process of still building this trajectory. As much as we already defined the different modules, there's still a lot of room for input. So without further ado, I'd like to pass it on to Mignon, who is the global head of DEI at Human Rights Watch and has a lot of experience in bringing DEI to the agenda at leadership level, community level, but then at many bigger organizations. So I think a lot to learn. Mignon, can I give the floor to yours? And I guess you also have some slides that you would like to share.
I'm okay. I'll just talk briefly since it's a lightning talk.
All
I'll
right.
I'll do that. Thank you so much, Gigi, and Nina. Thank you for inviting me to share a few thoughts with you all. I think this is such an important and an exciting initiative. So happy to reflect just back with you some of the things that I've been thinking a lot about. Just let me start briefly with my own background. So I used to be in the nonprofit space on the programmatic side, and then found that there was such a discrepancy between our stated values and the lived experience inside. And in that gap, I felt that there was something out of integrity. And so I started to do the DEI work in that spirit. And then I joined a global diversity and inclusion equity consulting firm working mostly with global for-profit organizations in different sectors all around the world. And then I went back internally and joined Amnesty International USA as their Chief Inclusion and Strategic Innovation Officer, building up this work, from the ground up. And last year, I joined Human Rights Watch as their inaugural global head of DEI. One thing is I'm from the Netherlands. I've lived in the US for about 15 years, but if you hear a little bit of a, Dutch accent, that's because that is my first language. So it's really nice to see some of you who are based in the Netherlands. Just to say, right, for me, DEI work is about social justice within the organizational context. Our world, our organizations are a microcosm of our world. And it was such an interesting space for me to say, how do we live these values, not only in a broader society, but we spend such a big amount of our time at work. How do we build organizations that reflect our values more fully? And I will say that for those of you who've been in different sectors, you might know this already, but there is a lot of similarity across the for-profit and the nonprofit space when it comes to DEI challenges around culture, around talent, leadership, training, all kinds of things that are quite similar globally and, independent of sector. However, there are some really unique aspects around DEI for our sector, the mission-driven organizations, because to me, DEI is absolutely mission critical. There's a business case, as I kind of said, I think we're all aware of, but there's also a deep mission case for our work, partly because of the history and how our organizations many of them are coming from, or the necessity of our work is very much rooted in our colonial past, and is still reflective in the very fabric of our organization. So it's about reckoning with our history and our unique positioning in that. The nature of our work requires us, if we say, for example, in my sector, right, human rights for all, it inherently means that DEI has to be core to that from the programmatic side as well. And then it's about the values we aspire to and who we seek to be as an organization and live those values inside and out, as Gigi was saying. That is core to me. It's about our very integrity and the credibility of our work. And that's what I talk a lot about with leaders, about how do we understand this as so core and not an afterthought or an overlay. And really understand how the legacies of colonialism, white supremacy, global North dominance are showing up in every aspect of the work, and the opportunities we have, the unique opportunities we have to be part of the change that we're trying to create outside. And one of my former bosses always said, you can't take people where you haven't gone yourself. So if we want to bring this out in the world, these values, this way of delivering our work, we have to do that inside as well. It is part of a collaborative process. And it just means that DEI becomes a core value, and that's for Amnesty before and now Human Rights Watch. And we're really trying to bring this in and say, just because we do this work doesn't mean that we got this. It doesn't mean that we automatically understand this. We're human and we all have our learning curves. But it does mean that we want to center it as part of who we are, right? And as part of how we can be most effective at delivering our mission. It requires that values alignment. In my eyes. So, DEI at Human Rights Watch is really intended to be part of organizational transformation and culture change. And we were kind of working from this concept of, culture by design versus culture by default. Many of our organizations have developed over time, and, culture has just been what it is. And now many more organizations, including yours, right, are looking at how can we be much more deliberate about the values that we live in our culture. And one of the things that I have always found is in the midst of change, even broad organizational change, or even a new program or a new partnership approach, or something that is more of a smaller scale, all of those new opportunities actually have a really nice way of building in DEI from the get-go, while figuring out all the long-standing structures in the organization. So I've been trying to identify all of these new things that we're doing and saying, like, how can think about decolonizing our partnership model now that we're trying to innovate in that space. So there is a lot of opportunity, I think, to do that. The other thing about our work is that it's meant to look at everything across the organization. So it's the what, the work itself, right? The who, so our staff, our communities, our partners, our donors, our vendors, our volunteers, and other stakeholders. And the how, our culture and the way in which we work. And so it's meant to be comprehensive, and so we're looking at talent management systems. We're looking at how our global strategy and how we're thinking about an intersectional analysis of the issues that we're working on, and bring that into our very nature of the work. The other part is a lot of DEI is about making the implicit explicit. So that's both about the implicit power structures, the implicit biases that are within our very being, right, as an organization, as individuals, and to make them explicit, to look at them differently and determine how to move forward in a different way. But it's also about like our data and how do we understand what's happening, right? And in addition to that, I think it's really important that we also make more explicit what we seek to be as an organization. We talk a lot about anti-oppression, which is part of that looking at what's going on currently, but then it's about what are we working towards? How do we articulate a shared vision for the future? And I think that's so excited about this collaborative, where some of that I'm sure will emerge, or you might be already doing that in your own organization. The other aspect that I just want to share that I'm sure some of you have experienced, which is that, whether you're a DEI practitioner or you're a DEI committee, oftentimes a lot of the organizational challenges are kind of put on you as, here you go fix it, right? Because DEI is and to me, right, it's very important to help the organization understand that not everything is solely DEI, but DEI is part of everything. So if we, for example, want to measure our DEI work, but we don't have a way on how to collect demographic data, or monitoring and evaluation is not, where it needs to be, it's very hard to do DEI without the other necessary parts of an organization. And in the nonprofit space, given our limited resources, given how stretched we are, that is part of a very challenging part of how to navigate and be really resourceful around driving DEI forward when some of the infrastructure of the organization is either still in development or not necessarily inherently supportive for the work. So for example, some of the organizations I've worked with, they did not have a learning and development function at all. So the only training was around DEI. But DEI needs to be part of a broader thinking of professional development and learning and growth and leadership that it's inherently part of, as opposed to, again, sort of something on the side. So that's just as an example to kind of help, like, where can DEI really be meaningful, and where do we need to think beyond DEI while DEI is still at the table? Now, I just want to, also just talk briefly about what I'm trying to do in our organization and in any organization I've worked in, is to really drive home the sense of we can do DEI from wherever you are. And we have to understand where we are in order to know where we're going. So that's both as an organization, right? One of the, I think, important skills as a DEI champion or practitioner is to be able to try and assess, even without a formal assessment, but just being able to gauge, where is my organization? Are we really doing this already? Are we really at the starting point? And how do you meet the organization where it is, but not leave it there, right? And take it on that journey. But sometimes we're trying to force something that we're just not ready for. So that's one of the parts to understand about DEI from where you are. It's about honoring where we are and where we're not and working with that. The other level to that is I work with all teams across the organization to identify how they can practice DEI in their own body of work. It's not all major change management or behavior change or changing our structure as an organization. That's part of the broader work that we need to do. But in the meantime, we can do this work when, in our own space. So if you are a volunteer manager, right, there's so much you can do from a DEI perspective to make our volunteer experience more inclusive or to create more diversity amongst our volunteers. If you are in the media team, there's things about how do we use language and images to convey our values, or if you are, hosting events, how do we make our events more accessible? There's all of these things we can do, and when we find opportunities for DEI within our own sphere of influence, within our own existing skill set, it practices a muscle that then can also be leveraged for broader change initiatives, for broader culture change and behavior change. But sometimes people need to be able to access it in a way that works for them, and then we work with them. So that's something I'm trying to do, is to find ways to give every department and every team something to work on, and they already are doing a lot. That's the beauty of it. There's a lot to build on, but it is about sort of helping people to see that they can do this work in big and small ways. The DEI, if you have a DEI committee, there's I've seen a lot of different models about how this evolves. For example, right now, one of my team members, he used to be the co-chair of the DEI committee before DEI was a formal function. And we're now talking about how this informal body that was created now relate to the formal body of a DEI office, and how do we collaborate? And it's an evolution. There are different things needed at different times. And part of it is how do you kind of work with that, right? Both as a practitioner formally and as staff on those bodies. And I think the other part is, DEI from where you are, is that we ourselves continue to do our work. And I find things every day that I am learning about and for myself. And so there is a really important part of sort of doing our own work and also taking care of ourselves in the process, especially when you're a member of an historically marginalized community and are already disproportionately burdened with this work. So I'll close out with just a few final thoughts. One of the things about global DEI that is, of course, many of you know, is that DEI also differs globally. Different cultures, but also different generations relate very differently to what DEI means, and have different interpretations of that. And so, again, it's an important part of sort of the nuance of this. I think that what's the incredible thing about this curriculum and about the journey that everyone is embarking on is that it is about how do we continue to learn and engage with each other and learn from each other. There is so much that I think different organizations are doing that are creative and are really great to adapt for our own purposes. And at the same time, we can offer back into the space things that we're doing. And so I just am very excited about this because I think this is so necessary for our space. And I've seen a lot of these networks in the corporate sector, but not a lot in the nonprofit sector. I chair an executive roundtable here for chief diversity officers for particularly US NGOs. And it's both necessary from a professional perspective, but also from a well-being perspective. One of our members calls it, this is my medicine. I need this to recharge and to get re-inspired. So I'll close out with a quote that I think to me embodies what DEI is about. It's not just about, it goes beyond allyship and solidarity. It's about a deep interconnectedness that we understand. And you may be familiar with this quote by Lila Watson from the Aboriginal activist group from Queensland, Australia. And that quote says, "If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together." And I think that's the spirit in which this curriculum has been built, and I'm really excited for it. And thank you again for letting me share a few thoughts, and I'll hand it back over to Gigi and Nina.
Wow, wonderful. Showing some hands. Thank you, Mignon. I just wanted to highlight that I appreciate the different perspectives and dimension of this work. And it really shows that DEI really goes beyond just primarily the DEI work, but also interlinks with organizational perspectives, but also what it might bring us as individuals, what it means for understanding our own position, but also what it means when we actually start building together, when we start sharing spaces, and how much joy and well, extras it can also bring. So I really think that's nice that you touched this for us. Thank you. Will you stick around for the rest? Okay, so if people have questions, then they can still come to you, and hopefully you will also be able to share some reflections with us. Now moving on to Nina, I believe.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Minion, for this talk. It gives me like goosebumps, and it's really like giving energy on why actually we need also this DEI learning trajectory. So thank you very much for your inspiration. For those who don't know, for me, just for the short introductions, I'm Nina Guillem. I'm queer French-Dutch woman. So you hear probably by my strong accent. So if you don't understand, please raise your hands. So I'm a DEI manager in a Dutch organization and a consultant working partly for Partos. And I've been developing together with Gigi and the community of practice this DEI learning trajectory. So what I'm going to do now is to introduce you to this DEI trajectory to very briefly and quickly, and leave you afterwards some space for questions if there are still questions open. So how did it begin? So you understood then that it was a co-creation, and the purpose of this DEI trajectory is not to be made by one person to others and to educate persons, but more to engage a community. So we worked closely with the community of practice that I really, some of you are here present, and I'm very happy to see your faces and your names. So I'm very thankful for your input, but I will also, because I see also other faces here that I already know, because this trajectory was there way beyond we thought like, oh, that could be an idea. We did some webinars with partners about intersectionality or inclusivity together with the working group Leaving No One Behind. And then in June, we thought together with Gigi, let's do an inventory of needs, because we understand that people want to engage into a DEI trajectory, but what are exactly the needs to, to propose something that people can use. And this, you can find back also a little bit this discussion. I will not go into detail about that. But we developed a DEI trajectory that we will now present you. And we are developing also right now also a baseline assessment to start, with a baseline, because actually the trajectory is made not only to exist only in 2023, but also beyond. So I will explain that a little bit further. Gigi, can you go on the second slide or the following slide, please? And then I will explain you a little bit more about the trajectory. Yes. So about the trajectory. So actually this DEI learning trajectory is part of the bigger ambition of Partos, and the bigger purpose is to support the member organization, partner organizations, and other organizations from the development and the nonprofit sector in their quest to integrate a DEI strategy in their global strategy, strategy. So actually the goal of this DEI learning trajectory is to, by 2025, that all partners, members and partners have integrated sustainable DEI strategies in their organizations. So I know it's a very big ambition, but that's a little bit where we are striving for within this trajectory. And what it is actually, this learning trajectory. It is a space, like a learning space, where organizations, so non-profit organizations, can share their challenges, needs, best practices, tools, and methods, but in a structured way. The role of Partos in that is to support DEI practitioners or advocate to build these strategies with what I said, some tools or best practices, etc. But also to create a safe space and an inspirational space for people from different organizations to exchange between each other. And the last thing that we want to provide is to ensure a kind of accountability between organizations. So it's not like a benchmark, like people will get in competition to show who is doing the best on DI, but more at where do you stand and where you can involve into this process. So for whom is this learning trajectory dedicated to? So actually, it's not dedicated to DEI experts. I mean, nobody is an expert on those topics, but more people who are believing in its importance. So DEI advocates or practitioners, it can be members of DEI committees or task force or inclusive leaders or HR managers or any people from organization who are interested to do something about that and who are willing to take concrete steps towards DEI strategies and to contribute to a learning environment. So again, we want to make it accessible. So that's why this trajectory is free of charge. And we will try also to make it accessible if some people have special needs to access the learning space. But we want to make it also qualitative. So it means that we don't, that we will also limit the number of participants in order to keep it, keep the space of discussion small, but also qualitative. In limiting the number of participants, we want actually to, let's say, select participants who are the most motivated, but also who want also to transfer their knowledge to their organization. So it's not that we are like selecting one participant per organization, but more that one organization can send more participants, but that there is one, let's say, a person who can then transmit and disseminate knowledge to other people from their organization. And we give a priority to the members and partners of Partos and to members of marginalized and underrepresented groups, of course. Gigi will explain you a little bit more about the registration process at the end of this kickoff. But a little bit further about what does it involve to be registered into this trajectory. So in 2023, again, it's the first year of this learning trajectory, we will hold 3 modules in a block between February and May. So let's say every month or a month and a half, we will give a module, which we will present after. And between a second block will be held in between September and December, and that will be also 3 modules. So basically, you will get once a month an inspiration session, so organized by Partos and the community as practice. And between each inspirational sessions, you will have some commitments in working in groups or participate in peer-to-peer sessions or share information and tools on online platforms. And we think basically that the engagement of in this learning trajectory will be about 1 full day per month. About how we will approach this learning trajectory, what I said already, there will be online input sessions with inspirational speakers and professionals, which will give you input and a kind of expertise approach from professionals about certain topics that we will explain further. So it can have a form of a workshop, webinars, but also it can have some other forms like a tool sharing or a podcast or guidelines, etc. So that would be more this expertise approach. And the second approach is more the peer-to-peer approach. So what I said, people will be stimulated to exchange in small groups on online platforms, in subgroups, and that aims to engage discussions, small group discussions around challenges, ideas, inspirations, and into spaces that are not judgmental and that people can feel free and vulnerable and open to exchange with peers again. So it can have like forms like mastermind sessions, and what I call mastermind is like more practitioners on certain topics gathering together to speak about their needs and challenges and ideas, or collaborative online platforms, or even, I don't know, reading clubs or podcasts or WhatsApp groups, any kind of forms that are made for peer-to-peer. And the last thing about the trajectory, again, it will be co-created with the input of participants. So the modules are now not totally fixed. It's always evolving. And from module to module, we will take your input in order to make the modules most adapted to the needs. And we will also engage the community of practice, which is also present here, to give some advice and input about each modules, and maybe to facilitate the working groups. Did I forget something, Gigi? I think I said everything for now. Is it clear? Yeah.
I just wanted to highlight in terms of for whom, please don't be scared off if you're still in the initial phases. So just starting up to integrate DEI within your work or organization, because it's really a learning space. So even if you're already working on DEI for a while, or if you're just starting up, I think for us, it's not really a selection based on your experience or expertise. It's really the motivation and availability as well for you to be sharing. So that's what I just wanted to emphasize.
Absolutely. You don't need to be an expert at all. Thank you, Gigi. Is it, I don't see questions for now. Okay, that's great. So we will dive directly into the program that we will propose. So we will propose again 6 modules, so divided into 3 first modules, which will be a little bit more entering into the basics of DEI, and 3 last modules for the second block, which will focus a little bit more on more practical sides. So the first module will be more generally about how to build DEI strategies. So how do you get from a performative commitment to a real integration of DEI into organizations' strategies, and whatever the size of the organization, it's also very different. So we will provide you some frameworks for that. Second module, we will dive more into thematics of diversity dimensions and speak about how important it is to apply intersectional lens to DEI strategies. The third module will be more focused on structural or institutional racism and white privilege, especially in the development sector, which is really an important and one of the most important topics that we think it's at play for now. We had to make choices, but for now it's the most urgent thing to do or to speak about. The module 4 is more focused about how to create or support a DEI culture with the involvement of DEI communities. and creating a dialogue with leaders and how they become inclusive and support the commitment. The module 5 is really focused on measuring and monitoring DEI. And Mignon, you just mentioned about demographics and the importance of measuring. So that's also very central into DEI strategies. And the last module will be about the role of human resources in DEI and its specific role into DEI strategies. So what we are going to do now is to give the word to members of the community of DEI, community of practice, who will present from their perspective the modules and to give you some inspiration about what is it about. And we are happy after, so the 3 modules, we will do a break for questions. If you have questions, and the second part we will have also Q&A. Yes.
Perfect. So the first presentation is by Tushar Malik. Unfortunately, Tushar couldn't be here today, but he still managed to send us a presentation. So I'll give the word to this wonderful video recording, which I will share right now.
Hey everyone, my name is Tushar Malik and I'm the trailblazer for diversity and inclusion at AIDS Fonds SOAIDS Nederland, based in Amsterdam. Currently I am on vacation, so I'm not able to join live, but I'm recording this to introduce the first module for this learning trajectory. Do apologize for any background noise that happens you might hear. The first module on building DEI strategies. So why is it so important? So for us, for instance, at AIDS Fonds SOAIDS Nederland, we have been talking about diversity and inclusion in so many different ways, in so many different formats. So every team, especially our international team, has been actively thinking about like how best to really have actual representation of all the communities that we serve, also representation of, you know, our activists from the global south in all the intersectional diversity. But all of this has been a little bit more ad hoc, and in some parts of the organization it has been more prevalent or visible, and in other parts of the organization it's still happening, but it's on the back burner. So one of the things that we asked ourselves was like, how do we ensure that there's a streamlined approach to diversity and inclusion across all different sections of our organization? And it is so important to have that standardization, to have a strategy in place. So this is the first module out of the 6 modules, and in this module you will learn a little bit more about like why diversity and inclusion is important, what is the building the DEI case. You will also learn about like how to align the vision or the mission of the organization with what you really want to achieve for diversity and inclusion. So for instance, for us at AIDS Fonds SOAIDS Nederland, it really means putting our communities at the center. So what does it mean to have young people at the center? What does it mean to have people from the LGBTQI plus community, sex workers, and people who use drugs maybe work for the organization? What does it mean not to just hire, but also to ensure that they are included in, they feel included in all the work that we do, as well as staff. And the thing about that is that not one size fits all, which is also really at the core of this module. So it is a framework in which how you can think a little bit more about how to approach this at your organization, how to start defining this action plan, how to design some indicators, whether that works for you, whether it's a qualitative indicator or a quantitative indicator.
Yes, so we need to move on to the other video.
Hey everyone, my name is Tushar. Sorry for the interruption. And beyond the indicators, also to see like how best to involve senior management, you know, to gather more ownership, and ensure that this diversity and inclusion plan of action is embedded at every step in the organization. So in terms of learning objectives, we'll understand like why DEI is important, what these strategies include, what concrete steps an organization can take, and just where to start. So this is the first module, and you will move onwards with the other modules, which will explain quite a lot more. But all the best, and have a great journey ahead.
All right, thank you, Tushar. Lovely background music as well. Let's move on to the other one. And the presentation will be shared with the participants afterwards, so no worries, this will all be available to you. I would like to invite Lieke Scheelwer from the Dutch Coalition on Disability Development to share their perspective about diversity dimensions and intersectionality. Lieke, are you here?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hi, hi.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Yeah, happy to be here. Yeah, so I will share what the second module is about. And it's about understanding the different dimensions of diversity and how they intersect. And this includes, but is not limited to, dimensions such as gender, race, LGBTQI+, disability, and age. And for some people, intersectionality might seem like a buzzword or a very theoretical concept, but I would actually say that it's the exact opposite. It's a day-to-day practical reality for the majority of the world population. There's only a small minority that are white men who tick all the boxes of what is considered the norm, and so the rest of us are all people who navigate one or more identities on a daily basis, which are in one way or another discriminated against. So it's time that we also normalize this idea of intersectionality and learn how to practically integrate it into the way our organizations work. And so I included a photo on the slide of two women in a wheelchair who are from an activist group called Feminists Against Ableism. They're a Dutch group of activists. And this was during the Women's March in Amsterdam. And one of the signs behind them reads, "If you don't fight for all women, you fight for no women," which is a different way of saying what Black feminist Hamer said years ago, that nobody is free until everybody is free. Something Minion also talked about at the beginning. And in module 2, we will try to unpack what this really means within our organizations. And there are various angles to intersectionality. Just a few things I wanted to highlight and give you some examples. And the examples I'm giving are from the perspective of women with disabilities, which are the identities that I also have. So these are, the examples I'm highlighting here. But of course, there are so many dimensions that we want to talk about during this module. So one of the things about having multiple marginalized identities is that there is this double or multiple disadvantage. So take, for example, the payment gap that women experience in comparison to men. We know that this gap is bigger for women with disabilities, but not only that, they also face extra barriers to to access employment in the first place. So there are these, double disadvantages that we need to pay attention to make sure that these perspectives are included in our work. Another thing is that different forms of exclusion are very intertwined. For example, as long as there are a lot of barriers to participation for people with disabilities in society, they will depend on caretaking much more than would actually be needed if they did have equal opportunities. And this unpaid home-based care is most often done by women. So then in turn, these women also miss out on employment and personal development opportunities. So equal opportunities for people with disabilities are intrinsically linked with equal opportunities for women. And of course, there's so much more we can say about this and talk about during this module. And finally, an important thing to note is that while maintaining an intersectional lens, we also shouldn't forget to zoom in on very specific needs and experiences of different groups. So, like I said, the access needs for women with disabilities, for example, for sign language or for ramps, these are just very specific things that need to be taken care of. So there is no universal access without this attention to very specific access needs as well. Yeah, I think we can move on to the next slide. So this module 2 includes 3 components. It's knowledge building and awareness raising about specific groups and their needs. Also deconstructing our own stereotypes and reflecting on our own biases, and understanding how to apply an intersectional approach in practice. And we will do this by hearing from different experts who have their own personal and professional experience with different diversity dimensions, diving into key concepts and terminologies, addressing stereotypes and biases in our own language and the way we think and behave, understanding the importance of applying an intersectional lens, and finally, not only understanding, but especially also looking into how to apply this in practice and how to design DEI strategies that keep these diverse needs in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Lika. Showing hands again, thanks. Also for this mini lecture on intersectionality and very relevant work that DCDD is doing. So I really recommend to check it out, and they will also be involved in the trajectory. Moving on to the 3rd module, I can invite Chandre from Plan International. Are you here?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Is it working? Great, thank you. Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Chandre Guharai and I work as the Global Gender and Inclusion Network Coordinator at Plan International Global Hub, but I'm based in the Netherlands and I'm hosted by Plan International Netherlands. I just want to say that it's been really inspiring to be in this space today and just being part of the of inputting for the learning trajectory. And I'm also really excited to share with you about Module 3, which will focus on institutional racism and white privilege in the international development and aid sector. So I thought that I could start off on sharing a bit about why this is important to me. So I'm an intersectional feminist from Nicaragua and India, and I'm now working and living in the global north for one of the biggest INGOs in the sector. And I really abide to the motto or mantra of the personal is political. So really addressing institutional racism and making white privilege and white supremacy visible is at the heart of the work I do within gender and inclusion, social justice and human rights, but it's also something that I have experienced firsthand in my career in the sector. And I think many of us shared this, but I truly believe that if we are to create, inclusive, equitable, and transformative change that is long-lasting and sustainable, we need to name racism, we need to name white privilege, colonialism, to be able to transform systems of oppression and disrupt power. And I think if we don't do that, in my humble opinion, then we're only doing window dressing work. So I think many speakers already have sort of set the stage on why we're doing this learning trajectory, just contextualizing in the last 2 years after the murder of George Floyd in the US, which was, due to institutional racism within the police force. There was like an implosion globally to really look at ourselves. And obviously the international development sector was not immune to this. I just put a few of the headlines I could find that have come up in the last few years, but just also to give you another piece of evidence. So BOND, which is a civil society focus organization in the UK, they launched a report last year in June. And in this report, 68% of people surveyed in the study shared that they have experienced or have witnessed, acts of racism within their organizations in the last year. So just setting the case, I think obviously most people or all of us here would agree that we need to look at institutional racism and white privilege. So what we want to do with this model is help you begin to understand the many ways in which institutional racism, white privilege, and colonial practices affect our work, but also provide you with support and tools to help you identify and address them. And I briefly wanted to share a bit about Plan International's journey, which I think is very similar to probably your organization, because I think after 2020, there was this moment and opportunity for organizations to look within themselves and start conversations and actions to become an anti-racist and moving forward EDI. So we've had a long journey, but obviously after 2020, we have, this sort of like catalyzer opportunity to have these conversations. And Plan is now, identifying itself or committed to being an anti-racist organization and a champion of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Obviously, it's been a long journey that did not start just in 2020, but some of the key events that have happened recently are the co-creation of our feminist leadership principles, the launch of our anti-racism equity vision and principles, and more recently, our anti-racism and EDI roadmap. And just last week, our CEO signed the Pledge for Change, which is an initiative across the sector to support decolonization, anti-racism, and more equitable practices in the sector through 2030. So this is just to give you sort of like an overview of the framework of Plan internally, and I guess also, externally, how we envision the work we do with the communities that we support and aim to work with and for. Mignon was talking about learning and developing, and this is a core thing about Plan, but something I also want to mention, and I want to get credit where it's due, is that a lot of these initiatives have been pushed by people of color and teams across Plan International, from like historically marginalized communities. For example, the Disability Inclusion Working Group, LGBTIQ Inclusion Group, Gender and Inclusion Safeguarding Unit, and many of the country offices and regional hubs. And some of the examples that we have in terms of our curriculum for partners and staff are Power, Privilege, and Bias sessions, anti-racism sessions, Courageous Conversations Toolkit, anti-racism partnerships, Spotlight series, and our Global Action Learning Program on gender equality, which is Plantain Equality. Okay, so having said that, we can go to the other, to the next slide. Sorry, I'm talking too fast because I know I only have 5 minutes. I hope it's, it's not too fast. But on to more exciting things, I think, what will we learn in this module? So first of all, we want to co-create and build awareness around key concepts. So, understanding racism, neocolonialism, bias, racial and ethnic discrimination, white privilege, and many others. I mean, we can talk about white supremacy, white feminism, white gaze. And really, the idea here is to unpack, reflect on this context, and be able to identify them and see how they surface and play out in our everyday work. Then we're also going to be able to critically question and challenge power dynamics that reproduce inequalities, racism, and oppression within our organizations, and really think through what are some actions at the institutional, but also at the individual level, because something to remember and to remind ourselves is that often we talk about institutional racism or structural racism, but we make our own organization. So I think Mignon was saying, you know, we need to start with ourselves and our own behavior and see how we can use our power to change the status quo. And also we want to provide inspiration to devise and implement initiatives, tools, and processes to address racism and shift in power, and really moving towards thinking about a racial justice and decolonization vision and framework. So how we will do that? First of all, it's really important that we understand the impact of colonialism and sort of the historical legacy of the International Development Project, but also the current manifestations in the work we do. And in doing so, we're going to examine the unequal and often extractive relations between global North and global South. The whole trajectory is really envisioned to be a learning space, and it's grounded in this peer-to-peer approach. So we're going to be also engaging in brave and safe conversations to be able to point out weaknesses and oversights and challenges in doing this work. We're talking about white privilege and also privilege in general. So it's important that we center privilege and the white gaze within our organizations and understand how it manifests. And we're going to be doing this by unpacking what is called Unpacking Privileges program and also white homework. And then we want to build and share sort of like an archive or living library of tools and processes to address racism. One of the speakers, they mentioned that it's important to consider that there is no one size fits all, and this is very true to this. So we need to be mindful of that. We need to meet people where they are, but we also want to make sure that we're pushing the envelope. So I think all of the tools, processes that we share also need to be contextualized and adapted to the realities and the needs of your organization. So we're also going to have conversations about this, but things that we're going to be looking at are statements, strengthening or increasing inclusive representation and transformative leadership, anti-discrimination mechanisms, advocacy and communications, powering our internal movements to move this work forward. And to me, something that's really important as a DI specialist, gender and inclusion specialist, and as a feminist, is to ensure that we also allow for love, healing, and solidarity spaces where we support and center the experiences of people of color and people of historically marginalized communities, and that they drive the conversations and they lead the conversations. Because this is going to sound romantic, but I truly think that DI work is a labor of love. So I think it's important to have that there. And finally, we're gonna do an exercise of reimagining our organizations. What would Plan International look like if we didn't have racism, if we didn't have white privilege? What would be the voices who would be centered, who wouldn't be silenced? What would leadership look like? And I like this reimagination or reimagining exercise because Bell Hooks said that what cannot be imagined cannot come into being. And I think moving from that imagination into concrete actions, we're going to start working and devising action plans, strategies, tangible commitments to start shifting power and working together to pave the road to become an anti-racist organization. And here to quote Angela Davis, which really is a powerful quote. She says that in a racist society or a racist sector, it's not enough to be non-racist, we must be anti-racist. So I look forward to engaging and learning from all of you. And let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chandra. Wow, I really love that quote that DEI work is a labor of love. And yeah, thank you for this. Let's move on to the Q&A. From the audience. Are there any questions for any of the presenters of the modules? And maybe take some time to let that sink in. Perhaps in the meantime, I can ask one question to the rest of the team. If you have a question, you can just raise your hand, and then I'll make sure that you're attended. So for Chandre and well, sorry, Lika, in the process of creating these modules, I guess a lot of learning needs arose as well that were specifically for your organization. And perhaps you can share a little bit about what you would like to get out of this learning trajectory. So what is the one thing that you really are looking for in terms of support, or something that you would like to achieve by the end of the session, or sorry, this trajectory?
Yeah, good question. So I'm coordinating a network with a relatively small team. So I think for me, like the biggest question is, what can we do with very little resources to engage and to bring in all the necessary perspectives in our work. And I'm also, in general, I'm hoping that we can really exchange practical tools to really. It's also what I always try to do from our perspective. Like when we support organizations on disability inclusion, we really try to provide tools that can help you reflect and that can help you do action planning, because it's easy to get a bit caught up in concepts and terminology and experiences, which are all important, but in the end, what you really need is change. And so, yeah, I'm hoping that we can see the change, and also maybe it would be nice to celebrate changes along the way together.
Yes, here. I saw a question in the chat from Kirsten, which is a bit more practical. If this trajectory is also open to non-Partus members. So we do give priority to Partus members because they are sort of the first tier of which we are like the group we're working with, and their partners as well. So that also means they're international partners, but we also want to ensure that there are places available for people outside that network. We will have to make a decision at one point to see how we can bring the diversity in that group, but we really encourage people to apply. And there will be open sessions along the way as well. So that means that, for example, you might not be able to join in the core group, but the open sessions that will be organized throughout the learning trajectory will be available for a broader public. Question from Camille?
Yes,
Hi.
thank you. Not sure if it's a question or more a reflection, but I was a bit triggered by the last slide and the link with Shift the Power. I'm very interested in Shift the Power topic because at CIMAVI we're kind of top of this topic with our the way we build on our programs. Then I was thinking, so Partus is a Dutch network. So I'm just thinking it's a global question or global reflection that are we going to be discussing within white people in the head offices in the Netherlands, the question of diversity. You know, how can we make sure how you think about how are we then indeed maybe already in our process shifting more power, or at least including the opinion of local partners or people or local teams, or I mean, it's always a topic. I mean, you know, when we talk about diversity and inclusion, when we started to discuss it also within CIMAVI, where we ended up discussing between people from the head office in the Netherlands and not with our colleagues abroad. So yeah, it was just, yeah, I'm not sure if it's a question or more a global reflection, but have you also tried to integrate it in the trajectory? How could this be addressed? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Let me first see if any of the speakers would like to answer that, because it's also quite directly linked to the position of Partos.
Yeah, I mean, to my knowledge, we haven't really sort of like devised, you know, because power shift, you know, even the term, like, it means a lot of things and there are a lot of actions, but I think what would be interesting to do is just also learning in the challenges, because it's not easy. I mean, at least in my experience with Plan International, which we are a huge federation working, you know, in 70 different 5 countries. We have very good intentions, but in practice, we recognize that power dynamics, you know, hierarchical structures, even colonial practices on how we, you know, request so many things from country offices are still there. So I think as a starting point, because also we need to be aware that it's, you know, we don't have, I think we can do a whole year for each of the modules, to be honest. I think we need to be a bit more practical, but what would be interesting is just learning the challenges and maybe also learning about the good practices that people are putting in place and see what are the starting points. I think it also really depends on your organization and whether leadership is ready to have these conversations. Because I mean, at least for my presentation, I know that these are very big terms. People feel uncomfortable about these terms, and people don't always have the tools. So I think it's also gauging and meeting people where they are. But I think a discussion about these challenges and how we can move forward would be good. And yeah, we can think it through a bit more later. Thank you.
Thanks for that reply. I do agree. It's definitely something that we should take along, and it's also an invitation for the participants that your international partners, if you think that they might find it relevant to join this session, then please invite them, but also reflect internally, because it's a lot of internal work, and we often tend to over ask our partners for many things, even for the work that we need to do ourselves. So I think it's a very interesting component that we can take along. Being mindful of the time, because we still have 3 presentations left, and I also want to keep some space left for Q&As after, and a short follow-up for the next steps. So perhaps we can park the questions and continue with the presentations. And the next one is module 4, presented by Gaia. Are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi.
Thank you for giving me the words. Well, first of all, I just want to say how inspired I am. Like, I feel like everyone here is D&I expert almost, and it's been really great to hear all your points, and there were things that I will for sure reflect about, and I really hope I can also add some things to the conversation and that we can move this forward, as I think that especially these days we hear a lot about D&I culture and D&I policies, but then when it comes to like how people and organizations put them in practice, they are mostly tokenistic. So I'm really glad that today we are having this conversation and that there is this kickoff, and that we can hopefully put all these things also in practice. So thanks once again for having me here today. Well, first of all, my name is Gaia Zanaboni. I am a communications intern at WCF, Women Engaged for a Common Future. And we work internationally on projects that link climate and gender together. So I just want to say that myself, I am not a D&I expert, but I am, however, like a D&I advocate. And I've also worked a lot in youth advocacy and meaningful youth participation, especially. so like what I want to share today is more my personal story, and also how we can use it then for a D&I culture, especially that is community-based with inclusive leaders. Because I especially liked what was said before about D&I as a labor of love. I think that was a great quote, especially for this module, and it kind of summarized also all the things that I would like to say. So thanks for that. And yeah, I mean, to start off, I just would like to say that I feel like a lot of D&I is mostly translated via policy and HR, but then communities are so important for actually like talking about these things, and for actually like having the uncomfortable conversations that also this module will help the participants have. And I really feel like it's about creating also an understanding community with inclusive leaders, and having a community can be complicated at times, especially because when it comes to D&I, it is an uncomfortable and very personal thing. But I think that, as I also wrote on this slide, it's really important to kind of get uncomfortable and have these conversations, and to acknowledge that these things are hard to talk about because of also of our positions in society and what it brings to the table. But then I think that it's important to acknowledge it in your organizations, and then to kind of get into the discussion. And at the same time, this module is really useful because it's also about creating safe spaces. And these spaces are really important because then once you have intentional spaces, people feel more comfortable sharing things, but also really working practically on D&I. But as I also like added to the slide, I also think that sometimes it's not possible to have a safe space, especially like from a queer background. I hear the word safe space a lot, but then I usually prefer to use intentional space, because in the end, you can't have like a space that is 100% safe, because we all have our own biases, and we all have like our like personal like stereotypes of things in the world. And then I think it's good to say that spaces are intentional, because then we set the intention to grow and also decolonize ourselves, and we don't enter a space like assuming things. And especially the matter of space is really important for communities, because when you talk about D&I, it's really also good to be aware about the space where you are, the people that are there, and how much space you're taking up. And this module especially is really important to understand like everyone's engagement in this D&I strategies, and everyone's role, and how the space is being taken. Oh, sorry, I also struggle in the notion of a safe space. Yeah, indeed. I think it's something that we hear a lot, but then it also sets these expectations of like a space that's actually not safe. And I think it's good to like set the intention. So thanks for the comment. And in this uncomfortable feelings, having community care is also essential, because you can have as much HR as you want, but then it's really about also taking care of each other, and it's really about listening empathetically and honestly to each other, and admitting our own biases, and also being self-critical. And it's also about making it personal, and also personally, like even if I, for instance, really preach like meaningful youth participation, sometimes I struggle myself, like feeling that for myself, like feeling that like young person that can speak, and even today I feel quite nervous. But in the end, we're also here to learn from each other, and I'm very glad we can have it. But I think that then it's really important to admit it and then move forward. And I think these are all very important concepts that will be discussed in the module. And with this, I would like to introduce the module creating a D&I culture. So could we please go to the next slide? Yes, perfect. So the main goals are, as I already mentioned, to get an understanding of everyone's engagement in D&I strategies, and what's everyone's role, and how also can we hold each other accountable, and what is each other's mandate, and what is legitimacy. All these things are going to be discussed, and they're all very important to make sure to have a D&I community. And also it's also about having these difficult discussions that are a bit uncomfortable, but then also admitting to this feeling and trying to learn like from each other in an understanding and non-judgmental way. And then this module is especially useful for people that want to do something about diversity, inclusion, and equity, but just don't know how, and to be able for them to join this intentional space of learning and growth. And so what we will do, we will understand the reasons for a lack of commitment, because sometimes it does happen, unfortunately, that even if we are all enthusiastic, etc., there is less engagement, and in this way we can connect it to the accountability part. But also will be about moving from a culture of blame to support and accountability, finding strategies to facilitate safe spaces or intentional spaces, as I was mentioning, and organizational activism crash course. And all these things will be done through a mastermind session, as well as a moderation session. And basically all of these things are to build our inclusive skills and to strengthen them for D&I communities and inclusive leaders. And yeah, I think I said it all. I'm not sure you have questions or something.
Thank you, Gaia. Really appreciate this this perspective as well. And you did great. I think that it's that we should all consider ourselves as advocates and learning. Still that we're still learning. I don't consider myself an expert as well. So yeah, I'm sharing that perspective. On to the next module, and this is Mariela from
Yes.
RNW Media. Can I ask you to be mindful of the time, so to stay within the 5 minutes, because otherwise we're going to run over
Sure.
time. Thank
No
you.
problem. So basically, so at RNW Media, we started a trajectory of DEI, as I am leading the working group. And that means to look not only at the teams level in the Netherlands, but also in the development of our learning and digital products, as well as at our network. So we are looking DEI not only from a human resource perspective, but more how can we apply a DEI lens to the whole organization. And then we start creating a baseline. I think we created a baseline last year, and we embarked the team into having a series of workshops last year and this year that focus a bit of unconscious bias and building a safe learning environment. Trust is important, and then to move to inclusive leadership. And inclusive leadership is not easy, because it means that it's about a different way of working between teams, And that requires different attitudes at management level, but also at teams level. So this is in a nutshell what we are doing. So we can move to the next slide, please. And so basically, I'm into now the monitoring and evaluation of DEI and how this learning trajectory is going to look like. So why is it important to measure DEI? Basically, because DEI can help you to take better decisions. Imagine that DEI is not only about the human resource aspect, but it has a huge impact in the whole organization. So what is the scale that you want to measure? What is the priorities that you are going to measure? As one of us say that we have a limited team and limited resources. So each of us needs to set up a strategy to roll out, and what are the KPIs that you're going to measure about? So you will know faster if you're failing. And that's good to fail, because that's the best way to learn and to see whether you need to change a bit the approach, the strategy that you have, or perhaps you need to reconsider the format. So basically the data will help you to analyze how, whether you are in a good path or whether you need to change, and then you can perhaps change fast if you know what you are measuring it. So basically it's important to really set up the baseline for every organization and then identify how to measure that and what you are going to measure and evaluate. It's a journey, so it's difficult to measure the success because sometimes it's difficult to apply practices, changes of behavior, even in teams, small teams in the Netherlands or in the organizations that you have. There is a lot of things that needs to be done. So when do we pick what is going to be, the outcome of what you want to achieve in the first 3 months, 6 months, 9 months? If you're even thinking of scaling up to what we do internationally, how you're going to do that. So basically it's good to be very realistic about what we can do in every single step of the journey. So it's also important to look at the measuring tools and audits and the assessments, and looking at existing indices and benchmarks. So thinking about the PML system, yes, it's a good way to start implementing this, even internally, if this is going to be the pilot that you're going to be doing. Then the employee resource, employee engagement surveys are a good way to go. But what if your organization does it every 2 years? So how are you going to know if you are being successful with the changes that you are implementing it? So also it's good to have other mechanisms, like for instance, DEI surveys every 6 months, and not even that. Imagine in the one-to-ones check-ins with your teams. Imagine if you are training your managers in DEI and application of DEI. How are the behaviors that you want to see in practice? How are you going to be modeling the way how teams are working it? So DEI is more than the demographics or dimensions of diversity. It's about having a different way of working, and it's trying to understand the different perspectives that all of us with the diversity that we have can bring into the table to make better products, better projects, better teams, everything. So other feedback can also be like focus groups, for instance. And then, of course, it's nice to look at comparing and integrating DEI indexes. And there are many indexes that we can have a look at, and we're going to have a look at that. And then, of course, looking at what are good practices for baseline. And once you have the baseline, which many of us might have, like how do you measure the success of interventions that we have, and how to communicate this not only in the DEI field, but also how do we communicate to our teams? Because the more communications and the more progress we can create in our diverse teams that we are working, the more trust we are bringing, and therefore the more buy-in we are going to have, and the more support and allies we want to have. So this is in a nutshell, and I hope I keep to the 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariela. Very clear. Okay, moving on to the last one. Florence from Oxfam, from an HR perspective, and herself also in an HR position. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Gigi. Can you hear me well? Just
Yeah.
checking the sound. Yeah, great. So hi everyone. So my name is Florence. I'm working for Oxfam Novi based in the Netherlands. And so I'm just very quickly on my background. I'm French. I lived like 15 years in Spain before relocating to the Netherlands in 2020, so 2 years ago, more or less. And I have 15 years HR experience, more or less, in different areas. And I started to work more on D&I linked with HR like 4 years ago, I would say, when I was working for Oxfam in Spain. And so I will briefly explain a bit to you what when we worked on that trajectory, what we were trying to do now. And I am happy that the HR part is the last one of all that presentation, because sometimes it's only looking at HR, no? In some organization, it's only like HR has to improve a lot of things, or is everything under HR? But I am happy to see that, no, there are a lot of, this is like a puzzle, and HR, it's a crucial piece, of course, of that journey. But we need to connect with a lot of other things that we already mentioned in the other modules. So what we just very briefly, Oxfam Novi, what we set up a formal D&I committee like 1 year, a bit more than 1 year ago. So it's quite new. We really are on that ongoing journey. And just talking about because I have a bit double hat. So currently I'm working more on well-being and engagement within the organization. So in the HR department, but I'm also part of that D&I committee. So we have like informal groups, we have that formal committee, and what one of the action that we did during the year, it's to do like a kind of review, a D&I review internally. It was conducted by an external consultant to see where we are. No? So just to reconfirm some of the things that we already knew, but it's always good to have that now with the lens of someone who is external. And of course, the list of recommendations for HR in that review is quite long. So it's not only HR, but so we have quite a lot of improvements to do. And I would say that yeah, it's really connected with that employee experience. So really, like now, when we are attracting candidates, the way that we are doing that in an inclusive way, the way that we are starting, you know, the relationship with the employee, the development part, the performance management part, the engagement and well-being part, recognition, and also now when people are leaving the organization. So this is a bit like really linked with that employee life cycle, which I put in the slide. And the thing that we noticed in Oxfam Novi, which are also linked with the content of the module that I will briefly comment before, are really linked to first what Mariela, you already explained in the previous module about gathering data and to have that baseline. So this is a crucial thing, but also with recruitment, of course, a lot about inclusive recruitment, working conditions, flexibility, learning and development, reward. So these are really the key things that we need to work within the organization, within Oxfam Novi. And I have to say also that the COVID, the corona pandemic, no, brought us also a new dimension for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now within HR is about hybrid working. So now at Oxfam Novi, we have a lot of people working, no, remotely, coming to the office, working at home, and we need also to include all that aspect in the way we are managing people, and we have to do that in the lens of the D&I too. So you can go to the next slide, Titi. Yeah. So what we will learn now in that HR, in that module of HR. So adapting and creating inclusive HR practices, policies, beyond tokenism and quota. So this thing, one of the things that we need to improve in general. So of course, each organization has not the thing that have better or less or need to improve, but in Oxfam Novib, we already know where we are going to put the priority, but this is an important thing. Provide guidance and advice to HR professionals to attract, retain, promote employees with diverse backgrounds. So it's linked with this life cycle, employee life cycle that I mentioned before. And also the part linked with safety, psychological safety, well-being, and opportunity to growth within our organizations. So what we will do, the different things, I already mentioned about that, staying with our experience within Oxfam Novib, but it's promoting inclusive recruitment, onboarding, retaining, and exit. So this is like one of the things that we will do in that module. Also engaging in conversations and point blind spots. The thing that I noticed also within HR and working and also working with my colleagues, and it's we already have a lot of processes or practices in place, no? And sometimes we have this tension now about the timelines, the challenges that we are already facing within HR, and sometimes we are really biased. So it's also good to have this kind of conversations within our own HR communities, to challenge a bit ourselves, because it's not so easy to move from practices or policies, and we also can face really challenges. For example, in Oxfam Novib, we have these collective labor agreements that we need to negotiate with unions. We have that heavy process, I would say, which is good in one hand, but in the other one, it can be a bit challenging if we want to change things with the lens of D&I. So the other thing would be supporting well-being and personal development, which is part also of that module. And so improving inclusive HR policy, I already said that. And another last one, topic of that module would be focusing on integrity and anti-harassment policies. So within our organization, integrity, it's separated from HR, but it's completely linked with what we are doing. So this is also now linked with our code of conduct. If we have all the processes or procedures that we have linked with that that part of integrity. So I think I'm just stopping here because time is already.
Thank you, Florence. Yes, the time is already past half past 5 in the Netherlands at least. So I'm going to suggest to skip the questions for now and move to the next steps and the follow-up. And then if people are still available, they can always stick around. I will be here, and maybe some of the other speakers as well. But how will we move on from now? So important to know is that from today onwards, the registration for this learning trajectory is open. That means that you can go to the Partus website, and I guess that the exact website will also be shared in the chat. And there you can find your registration portal, and you can submit your motivation and a couple of other questions. And then the registration will be open from the 1st of November till the 8th of January. So that's next year, 2023. Afterwards, we will go through the registration list and make a selection based on the criteria that are also mentioned in the registration form. In the meantime, if you have any questions or ideas or options for collaboration, you can contact me, Gigi, or Roxana, who is also one of the motors behind this process. She's the current intern at Partus. I will be on leave, but there will be another colleague who can actually take on any other questions. And Nina, of course, as well. I haven't shared your mail address, but she will also be involved. So basically, for now, it's important to know that the registrations are open, and we will continue to work out the different modules together with the participants, mainly, I think, also in the first module. So we can actually base it as much as possible on the collective needs of the participants. So hopefully that is answering some of your questions. And then I'll just leave the the floor open to the other the other people that still have any questions, but I would like to stop the presentation now. Thank you for today, for all the speakers that presented the different modules. I am left really inspired by the different quotes, the very intentional words that have been shared by the different speakers. I think it really shows the scope of DEI work beyond just the buzzword. And that really gives me a lot of hope and a lot of enthusiasm and excitement as well. So I really want to bring across that energy as we move on. And I'm wishing you all a very, very lovely day ahead.